Welcome to Season 5 of the Lead with Coffee podcast, where we continue the journey into how you can change the culture in your business and your home through simple leadership practices. Grab a cup of coffee and get ready to join into today's conversation. Welcome back to Lead with Coffee. We're excited to be back with you today and just kind of share what's on our heart today. And just the title of this one is God is in this story. And do you ever just have those moments where you know that God's in the story that's unfolding before you? And I had that this morning. I had that awakening this morning as I was driving into the office and listening to a podcast of someone who I wasn't seeking out. I had seen a YouTube from them of something for our garden. And it came through as 5-year strategic planning, which is what we're doing this week in our business. But so I clicked on it and I thought, interesting, what do they do on a farm? Is it similar to what we do here at CBSI? And it turned into a God moment where he used this couple who was sharing their vision for their life over the past 5 years and their faith and their journey. And it wove this story that's so similar to David and I of their dreams, their big dreams, how they're stepping into it. It included coffee. It included a barn event center and all things that I would never have known about them if I hadn't just listened to their journey. And so I want to talk about on the podcast today with David about the presence of God in our everyday moments and the people he's using to influence us through the power of story, because it's so powerful. And we've even seen it here on this podcast. And we're influenced so much by social media, other podcasters, audiobooks, and this endless barrage of media coming at us about who we should be, what the world is calling us to do, and what happens when we slow down and listen to what God's calling us to do.
Well, and I think so number one, I think it's amazing that you recognize this, that in a matter of not very long, you created a whole list of things to talk about for this podcast, for something that you experienced today that was clearly something that God put in your path, and the fact that you recognized it. And I think, and I'm definitely not saying this happens every day, but every so often something will happen, whether it be a quote or an experience you had just in a conversation with somebody that is a complete God moment that you all of a sudden in the back of your mind in a split second you're able to connect the dots.
Right.
And to be able to pause for a second and recognize that, and whether it's, for us it's a podcast, it's a great story to talk about, but to stop and pause and maybe journal what those thoughts were, because it's moments like this that if you do not capture in writing, you're going to move on and you're going to forget, and you'll never have those same clear thoughts in your head again. So to put it down on paper, and now we're putting it on video, we're putting it on
my journal.
Audio. This is the journal, and not to go down too much of a rabbit hole, but I recently heard someone, I don't know if it was Kelly Cardenas or someone, it might have been someone else, talking about how their podcast is really their story, their personal journal that is forever embedded and that their kids will always have access to. So that's kind of cool in of its own, because this is a God moment that you experience, that you're sharing with the world, but really with our kids to be able to read, go back and listen to in, decades from now and be like, wow, they had that God moment at that time, and look where they went with it 10 years from now.
Right. I think I've shared before, but this is just how God speaks to me.
Yeah.
And those still moments when I'm just driving in a car or taking a walk or whatever it is in the garden. And that's when he talks to me. And it's not this loud, audible voice. It is through other people. It's through worship. It's through song. It's through a podcast of someone, again, who they're not even on a podcast platform. It's a website that they have their podcast on. So it's not like I would have ever found them. He put it in front of me for me to click on at a time when it was relatable. And I was thinking about it for our business and not for our personal life. And it by the hour in, I'm texting it to David while I'm at the stoplight. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you have to listen to this. Like, as soon as she said the barn and an event center, and that God had placed that on her heart, I was like, these are those moments of confirmation. And that's what he's doing. He's confirming to me that, it makes me emotional, that the dream he planted so many years ago, we're on the right track.
Yeah, and I think that's another moment when it is something that makes you emotional.
Right.
You know.
You're gonna cry. I can't look at you. You're what's happening here?
But that's why you have to capture
Yeah.
the moments. If you don't capture those moments and write them down, they're going to be gone, and you're going to move on to something else. So it is so important. So again, I say to those out there listening, if you experience something and it makes you emotional, it makes you like, wow, how did that all align? Capture that moment.
Yeah.
Spend time in that moment. Don't just move on.
Yeah. And aren't we all looking for confirmation? Isn't
Yeah.
that the thing in life? And so many people are looking for it from others.
Yeah.
And I think for me, like, when I get those confirmations from God that, like, you're doing it, it doesn't feel like you have the momentum. It doesn't feel like it's this grand thing because you're just doing this small step. But that's the confirmation, right? When you hear someone who's 5 years into their journey of what you're just starting, and they're doing it, and their story is so interweaved with the similarities of your story, from blended family. They've been married the exact amount of time that David and I have been married. It's like, what is happening here?
We got to meet these people.
I'm listening to David and I talk in 5 years. That's what it felt like. It felt like this podcast in 5 years was what I listened to today. And I think that it's...
Are we going to be homesteaders?
We kind of already are, but sorry, we will be vegetarian homesteaders. we are not doing the animals. But I think that we will be big dreamers, and that's what they are.
Yeah.
They're big dreamers, and their big dreams were having animals and providing for their family in a time before the world showed us we had to.
Right.
And now gardening and being self-sustaining is something that I don't think anyone isn't thinking about in a season with prices and economy and on the pandemic of when there's a shortage, what can you do for your family? And so this dream that they had turned into this huge platform unexpectedly through a pandemic. And now their dream is, and they never knew how they were going to get the big dream.
Yeah.
But God is using all these small ones to build a platform for them to get to their big dream. And when she said, I want a place for people to gather, it was like my heart just stopped. And I'm literally in the car like, oh my gosh, okay, like this is a lot. But this is God weaving the story. And this is those moments where whatever faith looks like for you, how are you slowing down enough to feel it?
Right.
It's not something you memorize. It's something that's living in you. And when you feel it move through you, there's this moment, this awakening where it's like, oh my gosh, this is the moment. This is that confirmation. And so simple. And in a start of a year that can feel slow and hard in January, and dreaming can feel hard. You know, it's what he needed to do for me to make me go like, okay, I'll just keep moving forward.
And I'll pause on that moment because you do need this right now, because it has been, and we talked about that 2 podcasts ago. The end of last year was hard with everything that was going on. And you didn't have that spark. You didn't have that energy that I knew was, you've always had and was within you, and you needed something that would be like confirming that this is the correct direction. It's been a struggle, and we're oh my gosh, we're learning so many things personally and in the business. But these are the things that help us grow, and getting the confirmation, something so simple of a couple that is on the other side of the United States that has no idea who they're affecting. I mean, it's beautiful.
Right. And I think that that's how God can use all of our stories. So there's as he kind of showed me that this morning, of course, like the next song that is like popping on, and I typically have Christian music just on in my car, and it's just in the background a lot of times. But then there's those moments where you kind of hear the words and you're like, oh. So, there's this song by Big Daddy Weave and Katie Nicole called God is in the Story. And so then it was just like, again, that confirmation and some of the lyrics of the story. I'm just going to, of the song, say, God is in the story. God is in the details. Even in the broken parts, he holds my heart. He never fails. When I'm at my weakest, I will trust in Jesus. Always in the highs and lows, the one who goes before me. God is in the story. And I just think, like, if we just pause on those words and just remember, he's in the story. You don't always see him. You don't always feel him. And for you, you might not have this, like, aha moment. But if you're not slowing down enough and giving yourself an openness to receive it, you won't have it.
Yeah.
And so it's just part of what we talked about last time. What are you listening to on your podcast, on your feed? That's something that's a passion, not just work.
Right.
And I even challenged David, like, what's on your feed that's sparking you? And this, because of what I'm doing with this other business, it's just this like passion project over here.
Yeah.
I got this confirmation, right?
Yeah.
And it sparks me for both businesses in the sense of like, okay, like we're still supposed to be doing this. And so then, a simple song reminds me, again, the same story. And so it's this narrative that's weaving in all these different facets, right? And if we allow it, we'll see more of it as the day goes on.
Yeah. And I was thinking about that too, as far as what feeds me. And, most of my podcasts have something to do with business or leadership. But honestly, that's what's feeding me. That's where I am right now, where I want to learn how to be a better leader for our marriage, for our kids, for the business. And so that is kind of my passion right now, to become a better human being. But I agree. I was thinking, do I listen to mountain bike podcasts? Do I, listen to how to make coffee podcasts? And maybe I probably will at some point. But I did. I paused on that, like, I am kind of one-sided when it comes to what I'm listening to. But for right now, I'm really enjoying it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you'll find what it is once you start allowing yourself to stop just being a leader and start being a creative, because we all have a little bit of a creative side. And it was learning how to do podcasts for a while. That was your creative side. It was something totally different. And I think the point is, listen to something that either allows you to grow in a different way. Be a continual learner, but not just in one area. Not be so single tracked where it's like leadership. It's like, that's awesome. But where are you learning something else?
Right.
Where are you learning something else that just is less stressful? Because there isn't this monetary thing attached to it, right? Like where you can just go like, I want to listen to this because this allows me to escape. Weight health and weightlifting, or a Jocko story that you're never going to be a Navy SEAL, but you love to listen to it.
I know. Well, and I would say the times that I'm not learning, then it's music, and it's usually worship music that I can just, I can have that playing in the background, whether I'm working in the office or working in the yard or whatever, and that does it allows my mind to just kind of go at ease and have a little more peace. This podcast is sponsored by CBSI. For the last 35 years, CBSI has helped customers navigate change in their organizations, whether they need a team to manage their construction projects or are planning a relocation to right-size their office space. With transparent communication and culture-building strategies, CBSI leads the leaders of organizations through complex projects. If you are in the need of a proven team, check them out at cbsisandiego.com.
So as I was thinking about the podcast and just how God's in the story, I was thinking about David and I and how we weren't really dreaming together until the first Dream Big in 2020. And then when we went to the Oaks in 2021, I think it was a pivotal moment for us in our marriage because we started to dream together as a couple. We started to talk about what would our life look like if we moved, if we sold our home? What would it look like if we dreamed bigger for our business?
Yeah.
And then I think that was one of the first times probably I really started sharing more about the barn with others. Actually, I think David shared it with everyone at the table more than I did. But what we found there, as soon as David would start to say, oh, I have a dream about a podcast, Sarah has a dream about a barn and an event center, the people around the table would all say, oh, we have a dream about an event center. Oh, we're going to start a podcast.
Right.
Talk about how those small moments, right? You can see it. And those people you still follow.
Yeah. And gosh, I should have been a little more prepared to really think about how that was. But yeah, so we were, and you're talking about while we were there.
While we were there.
Yes.
What we kept saying was like,
Right.
God's really surrounded us with like-minded people, dreaming big, but similar dreams all across the country.
Yeah, no question. When we were at the Oaks, whether it be Kevin and Mr. Chick-fil-A in Canton, Georgia, who does have an event center that he made it for all the teenagers that work for Chick-fil-A.
But he didn't yet. He was working
on
it.
They were working on it. But yeah, it was. And he had a podcast, and it was like, how... And we've talked about this before, how beautiful it is to be around like-minded people that are going after the same types of things at the same time.
Yeah.
And we do. We we listen to them, and God just puts you in those moments sometimes. He puts you in those moments to, again, just like we talked about earlier, to justify that you are, or clarify that you are on the right path.
Right.
And so going into something, just thinking you're here to think about what your dreams are, and I would even say to pause and listen more to others, because the blessings that you will get out of listening to others' dreams might be even more than you thought would be possible just thinking about your own dreams.
Yeah. I think there were maybe 25 people at this retreat. And it was more like a reunion. It wasn't a framework where everyone that wanted to be a podcaster or own an event center for people, a place for people to gather where it was like really specialized. It was like, no, like 25 people from all across the country came together and everyone was trying to create space. Whether it was for healing, mental, emotional, physical.
That's right.
Everyone was trying to create space.
There was an officer and his wife from Texas, and they were creating a place for officers to go to deal with traumatic issues, right?
Right. And I think it was it Rachel who was opening up a space, trying to find space in Colorado for battered women.
Yep.
And
she did.
And she did. And then, we met people who have podcasts already, very successful podcasts.
Right.
We were talking to them. We've crossed over podcasts with Kevin from Chick-fil-A. I think that it was just one of those things where it was like, I remember standing on the balcony with you one morning just going like, this is just this moment where God's just saying, again, I'm surrounding you with people who can show you the way or journey with you at a similar point in time to encourage you that you're not alone in dreaming. You're not alone in wanting something. And I have planted this seed in you, and I'm surrounding you with resources, and don't pass it by. Step into it. And I think that was also that moment when we looked across the way and I said, that's the type of land I want. And it happened to be for sale.
Right.
We didn't buy it, but I think those were those moments of that seed planting.
It certainly was, yeah.
And it was also that moment I remember where you had to go sit separately and kind of write your big dreams down. And when we came back together, I remember the tears just flowing and saying to you, like, we have to move.
Yeah.
I think it's time to move. And we're looking for land for this for this barn and this dream that God's placed on us. And now, a year and a half later, it was our backyard and it was the move for our family and all those things where it's like, it's so abundantly more because we were looking for a place for others. And what he was saying was like, I'm going to create this place for you first so that you can get refilled to go build a place for others and start here. You got to start somewhere. And so I think it's just kind of, that's just part of the story. It's part of what he's been weaving. But that's where we started to kind of write it down, right? Yeah. And we had that moment with the rocks where you had to just go grab 2 random rocks. And then Bob Goff said, how are these rocks relating to your dream when you think about your dream? And so I was talking about the barn, and I had a big rock and a small rock, and he said, how does it make you feel in your hand? And I said, this big rock just it feels so heavy. It feels like I can't grasp it, and it's not comfortable yet. And this smaller rock just feels like it feels right. Mm-hmm. And it was such this pivotal moment of something so simple, but it was just kind of God saying like, this is what's right for right now. Yeah. Your big dream's going to come, and it might look so much different than you think it's going to, and abundantly more, but this is right for right now.
And I do have to admit, I had 2 rocks in my hands also, and I don't remember any feelings that were special about that moment. but I do remember you talking about that in front of the group and how much that made sense on your side. For me, I was like, all right, I'm not totally understanding this, but and that's why I don't remember exactly what I said.
But maybe your journey at that moment was to be in mine.
Yeah.
Right? I think
that's what I'm saying.
That's part of marriage. Mm-hmm. It's not always like your path, my path.
Yeah.
This was very much like, oh, it's our path if it's going to be our yard.
Right.
Instead of like a space that's for the public, like versus our yard. And then kind of if we go back to the Roots and Refuge, the group that the couple that I was listening to this morning, like I said, I stumbled across them so randomly when we were trying to build out the farm, and they had a YouTube video of how to build trellises for vegetables. I mean, something so simple, right?
Out of cattle panels.
Yeah. Out of cattle panels, yeah. And so that's what YouTube pulled up. And we, we'll just be honest, like, they're not your typical couple that we would follow, right? Like homesteaders and, and on the East Coast and farming and animals for their own meals. Like, that's not really what we do here, right? Like, we go to Costco. And, but, I wanted to grow vegetables with the flowers. And so when I followed her a little bit here and there, and she's got great stories, but over the past few months, her story that she's been telling is about her personal journey, her life, her faith, her boldness in her career, and how God's used it, and how God really, laid out a path for them to move their home to a new state. And so then all of a sudden it was like, the stories were weaving and they were starting to come together. And so then as I'm listening this morning to their 5-year strategic plan, and it was like, oh, okay, I want to hear what they're doing, because that's what David and I are literally doing with our team tomorrow. But as she was talking, it was just like, oh my gosh, like this is what David and I do. And what we normally would do in January, last January, we sat on the beach and had a planning session. But this January, it was like, don't even ask me to plan. I'm not in a mental state to plan. So this was like God's little, like, you need to get back into who you are, right? You need to get out of this spot where you feel stuck and get back to who you are. But again, it was like he was showing me the roadmap if I want to see it. If you say you want these dreams, you say you want to own a coffee farm in Hawaii, if you say you want to own an event center and have a space for people to gather, here's what it looks like.
Right.
Here's someone stepping into the unknown where she's saying, like, I don't know how we're going to get there yet, but here's what we're doing right now. And I'm just going to keep stepping into it every day and buy it and move forward and see who God puts in the story. And so I think again, one of those things where it's like, you never know. Even on this podcast, we've had feedback from people when we released the story of the barn. And our friend Dawn, who's been on for real estate, called like that night, like, I have to talk to you about how this podcast influenced me today. And it's that simple. You never know what you're going to share that's going to be in someone else's story. It's going to impact them.
Motivate them, or just give them that moment that they needed, that assurance that they were heading in the right direction. And honestly, that has been one of the main drivers of this podcast, whether it be leadership or our life journey. We want to inspire others. We want to inspire others that, you know what, you can dream big, you can step into it, you can go through some really hard times and in the valleys, and, you know, figure out how to get back out of them, and lead other people well by going through what you had to go through, by learning from having tough times, and also sharing your mountaintop moments. And that is what we've been able to do. You know, this is episode 95. And I want to continue that because I think the stories are so good. Now, some of them maybe aren't impactful to anybody, but there's going to be others that are going to be impactful, even if it's to one person. That's enough for me.
Yeah. I think we never know our impact, because when it comes to something like a podcast, you have 95 episodes. And if you're like me, I'm not just listening to the latest episode. I'm going to a title that I feel like relates to me today. So someone might be listening to episode 1 and then going like, who are these people? Why are they on my feed? And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, there's a title that I like. Let me click on that one. And maybe it's today's title because you're a person of faith and you saw that we wrote God is in the story, and you're looking for people that are bold in their faith and their leadership. I think that that's rare.
Yeah, and you just never know who's listening, because if I can look at the statistics from the episodes, I mean, of course, it's a lot of United States, but we're in Europe and Belgium and the Philippines and all these places across Australia. It's like, cool, there's people in Australia listening to our podcast. How fun is that?
Right, and we don't know why.
Yeah.
But it could be just like what happened to me today, that there's somebody in Australia that's listening to this moment and saying like, this is so similar.
Yeah.
This is so similar of dreaming and moving and confirmation, or of having bold faith, of just saying, I can be bold in my faith. I can be bold in my bravery to step into my calling, even if it doesn't make sense to anyone around me. I think that's what we've shared over the last year, is what it looks like to walk in faith, even when others don't understand it. And they're never going to understand it because it's not their story.
And they don't have to.
Right. And I think that's part of it. And so I'm not like a word of the year person. But I think in action this year is us being bold. It's us being bold in what we're saying on this podcast, how we are opening up and being brave, but walking in an element of faith that says we can share it. We can share it boldly. We can share the dreams boldly. We can share the wins and losses boldly, because that's our story and that's our journey. And why come on here and just tell you how amazing everything is? Because what does that do for you if I never share the hard?
Right.
If I never share the real stuff that's happening behind the scenes, what does that do for you?
Yeah.
But if we open up and we say, here's what it's like to be a blended family. Here's what it's like to go through the struggle of aging parents. Here's what it's like to own 2 small businesses and be responsible for employees, or what it's like to try to keep a legacy of a business that's been in business for 35 years and not be the person that makes it fail. Because the person before you didn't fail. But guess what? If it closes, that's on us, right? Like, what's that like, right?
Yeah, and the pressure to keep the legacy going if our kids want to be part of it.
Right. And to make those decisions about when does it stop.
Right.
Right? Because the person before us built it to keep going for as long as they wanted.
Right.
not as long as you wanted.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that that's part of it. Like, what does legacy look like? And so I think that we've just been on this journey to open up our story to you and be open to hearing other people's stories more and sharing the impact.
Yeah, I think, and yeah, I guess I don't even have words right now to explain what I'm thinking right now. So you just have to take the mic back.
Jessica from Roots and Refuge was talking about their faith walk, and before they were doing what they were doing now and really having this strong presence on YouTube as an educational platform to teach people how to homestead, raise their own food and crops, and really be present in their own lives for their family in a sustainable way. Her husband was in ministry. And so she was talking about one moment of walking through the garden and just pondering on Ephesians 3:20, which says, our God is able to do exceedingly abundantly all that we ask or think about, and exceedingly abundantly more in that sense. And it started to make her wonder, what am I thinking about? Am I just comfortable where I am, or am I really opening myself up to, like, what does abundance look like?
Yeah.
And that's when it changed for her. That's when they realized that they needed to dream in abundance. They needed to dream in what does more look like, not just what is in front of me, what's comfortable. And her husband, when she said her husband asks people a question when he gets to know them, what's your dream? And I was like, again, this is like those passion talks that we do with people, right? When we're kind of getting in, really understanding people and our employees, like, what are you passionate about? What do you want to do? We do this all the time. And it's what he does too. And so I think it was just that reminder about, what are you dreaming about? What are you stepping into that is uncomfortable versus just staying comfortable?
Yeah.
Because we all have this purpose and calling on our life. And so it's time to start listening to that still small voice. It's the beginning of a year. It's like a renewal. And what are you doing with it?
Yeah. We last week's podcast, we talked about 2023, and it was called Big Dreams Require Small Steps. So we want to dream big, but in order for those dreams to happen, you have to take that first step. It could be a little step, a mini step before you take a bigger step, but you got to step into it. I mean, it's going to be scary, but I guarantee if you're comfortable, you're not growing. But if you're uncomfortable taking a small step, you can handle that. And what that's going to lead to, who even knows?
Right.
And you're not going to know unless you do it. So it's just an encouragement. With us, there's a lot of scary things that are coming up this year that we have to step into that we're hoping go really well. We don't know that everything is, and that's okay too. That's all part of the journey. But my encouragement, again, just to step into the passions, the dreams that you have.
Yeah, it's part of the growth in the failures, right? And there's grief and there's growth, and there's a whole lot in the middle.
Grief and growth. Name of our next podcast. It's a good one.
It's a good one, yeah. We'll see if you guys cling onto that one. But I hope that this one helps you, even if you're not a person of bold faith. There's something waking you up at night. There's something stirring in your heart. There's something where you're like, I really can't wait to do that one day.
Right.
And what if you started stepping into that one day? Maybe you want to travel. Maybe you want to see the world. Maybe you want to get married. Maybe you want to finish that degree. What are you stepping into? What's your one day what happens if that one day never comes? If you don't actually move towards the one day. One day I'm going to own a coffee farm. All right. Well, guess what we're doing right now? We're learning how to farm, right?
And we're trying a lot of different coffees.
And we're drinking a lot of coffee to try to sustain ourselves. But think about what your step can be today. Like, what can you do today to take one small step into that dream? And maybe for you, it's finding a podcast of someone that's already doing it for confirmation that it can be done. And it can be done from nothing if you're willing to step into it.
We appreciate that you decided to hang out and spend some time with us discussing life and leadership. It would mean the world to us if you would share this episode on social media to increase our online presence. If you enjoyed the episode, please take a minute to rate it and review it wherever you listen. Mahalo!